Hello, this is the influenza epidemic of 1918-1920. It has got a nickname, the Spanish flu. All right, and I'll explain why it's called the Spanish flu. For you nerds out there, the Spanish flu was the H1N1 influenza virus. Okay, all right, and so it started in 1918. So think about what was going on in 1918? Well, World War One. Remember, the United States entered World War One at the end of 1917. And the first case that we know of in the United States was on a pig farm. I believe it was up in New York. Okay? That doesn't mean that it was started in the United States. We don't know where it started. But as the United States was getting ready to go to war in Europe, and it was a big deal at the time, and so the flu was a consideration. And here you've got a bunch of troops in Seattle, Washington, with face masks on, and they're well, I guess they're marching. They're not in step, but they're on their way to go somewhere. Okay, I mean, they're this is in Seattle, Washington. Okay, and and so the war went on, and so you have Liberty Bond parades. You've got fundraising that needs to happen, and the city of Philadelphia decided, even though there was the flu epidemic going on, to not cancel this parade. And because, hey, we need to raise money for the troops, Liberty bonds, war bonds. And so 200,000 people lined the streets, and it led to one of the worst outbreaks in the country. I read somewhere that this particular parade resulted in 12,000 deaths. Okay? So check this out. You've got a case study of two different cities during this flu epidemic. You got the city of Philadelphia, and watch how it skyrockets. Okay, and then you've got in St. Louis, though, we would call today, they tried to flatten the curve with face masks and social distancing. But the point is the difference between these two dots, first case in Philadelphia versus social distancing that was enacted, and then here. First, they learned what St. Louis did is they watched Philadelphia, and they learned their lesson from watching Philadelphia. October 5th and October 7th, they immediately enacted social distancing and face masks and things like that. So that's what happened in Philadelphia compared to St. Louis. Okay, and so things kept happening. This is Wall Street, New York City, 1918. And that is actually Charlie Chaplin. And he's out there using his celebrity face to get these people to buy Liberty bonds. And I can only imagine, these people, spreading the flu around. Okay? So now, why was it nicknamed the Spanish flu? Well, we don't know where it came from. Okay? Let me just make that clear. But what happened is there was World War One. And Spain was not in World War I. They were neutral. And so Spain did not censor their newspapers. Okay? So Spain was more freely able to talk about the flu and the numbers of deaths and all of that. And so people around the world were reading Spanish newspapers, and they were getting their information from Spanish newspapers. And for a while, some people thought that it was worse in Spain than in other places, but it wasn't. But that's where the nickname Spanish flu came from. But the United States censored their newspapers, and so they downplayed those numbers of people who were dying of Spanish flu. Okay? So was France and England and Germany. So let's keep in mind, World War I did not cause the epidemic, but having millions of men travel, be malnourished, be stressed out, and living in close quarters helped spread the flu around the world. Okay, and that's true for any army during this time period. So here's a little, here's some quarantined soldiers in Kansas in 1918. And remember, these people died a lot. 650,000, that's one estimate, of Americans died from the Spanish flu. 650,000. And it wasn't the flu that killed people necessarily. Most people died from secondary infections. So when you get the flu, that's caused by a virus. But if you get a bacterial infection because of all the snot and the phlegm in your lungs and stuff, that's called pneumonia. And that is a bacterial infection. And today we could just take an antibacterial to get rid of, or at least try to get rid of pneumonia. But we didn't have antibiotics back then. Okay? We didn't have antibiotics. That won't be available until the 40s, until World War II. Okay? So you got major league sports requiring masks, some of them. You've got a Georgia Tech football game here, and you even see Soldier here wearing a mask. Theaters were closed. You do not want to be in a theater with people with flu. Here's another quarantine. Police officers wearing masks. And this is true today, and this was true back then. If you take care of your nutrition, you are more likely to fight it off. I'm not saying it's a cure, but if you're eating vegetables and green vegetables, and that is true today, you are better able to fight off any sickness if you eat healthy food. That was true back then too. And these are Red Cross nurses in this picture. Symptoms, and were a little different than COVID. The symptoms included bleeding from mucous membranes in the nose, ears, stomach, and intestines. So lots of nosebleeds, and ear bleeds. And this was really unique to the Spanish flu. Some of the infected had a blue tinge on their face. Imagine the blood in the skull. Here's a picture of a train conductor refuses entry to a passenger because he didn't have a mask. And you had what were called mask slackers back then. And it was a nickname given to those who refused to wear a mask. And they would even have rallies. Look at this one. Anti-mask meeting at the Dreamland rink, skating rink, to protest against the unhealthy mask ordinance. And so, again, this all sounds familiar. Here's 100 mask slackers being held on charge of disturbing the peace. People got violent over masks. And the violence goes both ways. In San Francisco, a health inspector shot 3 people. Okay, so the violence goes both ways. Mass graves were dug since people died so quickly. I mean, it was fast. Entire families would die. And here's something interesting about this flu that's different than others. Mortality rate was high for those younger than 5. It was high for those 20 to 40, and high for those older than 65. Now, this is a surprise. The 20 to 40 age range, usually those are the least likely to die. But in this case, because those aged 20 to 40 usually have the healthiest immune systems, but what the flu would do is it would cause those with healthy immune systems to die because the flu would cause their immune systems to go into overdrive. And when your immune system goes into overdrive, you get more fever and you get more inflammation, and it led to more deaths. So ironically, people with healthy immune systems were less likely to survive the Spanish flu. Here's another army barracks. You can tell this is a gym. You see the loops and the basketball court. This is like an army gym. Okay, so a little bit of creativity with the colors. Cleanliness was very important for this flu. Now with COVID, we're not so sure because we think that a lot of the virus comes straight from other people's mouth and noses, and it lingers in the air because the coronavirus is in water droplets. But back then, the influenza could be on surfaces, kind of like the common flu. So when you touch something, you need to wash your hands before you put your hands in your mouth. That was more true for that flu. And here's something you got to understand about men back then. Men would just spit everywhere. It was just a common thing. You'd be walking down the street and people would just spit. And so with the Spanish flu, that would spread the flu. So campaigns were created to discourage it. And fines, no spitting. And the virus did affect World War I because it affected Germany and Austria-Hungary more than it affected our side. England, France, the United States. We were all affected by the virus, but it affected their side more. And so it would tip the balance in a very even war that World War I was. Yeah. It's a really cool picture, and you can see how she's not wearing her mask right. But these are the hip people. This is what young hip people looked like in 1918, 1919, right before the 20s. I just love this picture. Most workplaces did require masks for about 2 years. And here's some improper mask use. You need to cover your nose. Okay. And this is some weird air purifier. It might have worked a little bit. It might have helped. And just like today, people were misinformed about preventing and treating the virus. These boys wore sacks of camphor around their necks, thinking it would help them. Now, some of you may know what camphophonique smells like. Well, you can imagine what this stuff was. More people died from the Spanish flu epidemic than died in World War I. Estimates vary, but we're thinking 50 million people died of the flu worldwide. The fatality rate was about 2%. Twice as much as the COVID-19 death rate. And the seasonal flu has a death rate of about 0.1%. Okay, and if you agree with the figure, 675,000 Americans died from this flu. That's more than World War II, and it's more than World War I. Okay. And finally, this is just a little bit of politics. Woodrow Wilson arrived in Paris to fight vigorously for a secure world peace with the Treaty of Versailles. Then he caught Spanish flu. Weeks later, he was tired and incapable. His inability to fight for the Germans left the French to create the harsh terms against Germany in the awful Treaty of Versailles. So, in a strange sense, the Spanish flu led to the rise of Nazism, and which led to World War II. Okay. All right. That's all I got for you.